had a spate of gun violence, of tragic incidents, of children being caught in crossfire of gang members with guns. We had a story from John Caniglia of the Plain Dealer recently talking about this nexus of guns, gangs, and recidivism, how gang members tend to be the most likely to repeat their offenses and to get their hands on crime guns. We're going to talk about that issue of crime guns, how you deal with that. We're going to try to broaden the lens on gun violence. We had an editorial recently about gun law reform, but we're going to take a deeper look today. I'm Elizabeth Sullivan. I direct the editorial board for the Plain Dealer and the Northeast Ohio Media Group. This is the Opinion Show. I am joined today by Kevin O'Brien, the deputy editorial page editor of the Plain Dealer, and by editorial writers Sharon Broussard, Chris Evans, and Pete Krause. Sharon, I'm going to start with you, just to kind of give us an overview of at least how you see these various interconnections and where some of the pressure points possibly might be to change this pattern that we've been seeing in Cleveland this summer.
I thought John Caniglia did a really good job of capturing kind of the despair of the situation, even among former gang members. He had a story about one who was actually trying to find a job, but because of his, his criminal record and other things, he was unable to do so. So it just kind of portrayed a picture of just kind of people who started out using violence for various means, or maybe even for protection, and ended up getting roped into a life that they can't get out of anymore. To me, it talks a lot about prevention on the first end, so that way you get fewer kids who are interested in being a part of gangs, and then fewer kids who you have to wrestle out later on. I'm not sure about the tougher questions about what to do about people who have been gang members and are now looking for jobs. I'm sure that there are some groups out there that maybe are trying to work on that level, but that's much harder, I think, than trying to do a better job with our young people to give them the supports that keep them away from a gang life.
One of the people that John focused on was named Theo, and he wound up back in prison because he was trying to make some quick money by selling, illegal guns to, as it turned out, an undercover police officer. So that was an example of how, the police are trying to get, make a dent in this illegal arms trade, but it certainly is just the tip of the iceberg. And we hear frequently when we write about gun violence issues that we're, our focus is more likely to capture legitimate gun owners than it is those who deal in crime guns. Kevin, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that last point is a good one to discuss. The idea that you're going to blame the implement for the crime, which seems to be the sort of the reflexive action of a lot of people, it takes you farther from a solution rather than brings you closer to it. There's a cultural phenomenon going on, and it has to do with economics. I think it's very unfair to say that it has to do with race. I think a lot of people make that mistake on the other side. They want to make it a racial issue, and it's not. It's an economic issue. It's a problem of people who are concentrated in a place that's dangerous, and they're trying to figure out how to make their way in the world and how to just survive. And the dangers don't come from race. We see lots of black on black crime, and it simply is not a racial issue. It's an issue of a violent culture that, as Sharon was saying, and unless you get to the root of that and make some changes in the way people view the world and people view the people around them, you're not going to get anywhere. And the implement that they use to get their, to have their way is really immaterial.
And I think the dangers that you talk of are largely the temptation of easy money through the sale of drugs. And what kids need are parents, siblings, people in the communities pushing them towards productive pursuits in the schools.
But let's be frank that you can't really affect that picture of dysfunctional families or people without hope in their lives, as readily as you can perhaps address some of the illegal trade in guns by
But
doing
why
a
is there
better
not,
job.
why is there not hope? Why are the Cleveland schools not offering kids today the opportunity to get an education? Do they not have extracurricular activities? Are there not recreational centers in the cities that offer sports programs and different things? I mean, are the opportunities really not there?
Well, I thought, in talking to the kids, I mean, what the main or the initial attraction to a gang is that the gang offers them what they're not getting at home. It offers them support, it offers them camaraderie, it offers them safety, it offers them protection. And so, like Kevin was saying, I mean, there are cultural issues here, and it isn't racial. These kids are looking for a structure in their lives, and the structure that they find most easily and then that's most acceptable is this gang.
But one of the things we talked about earlier this week when we discussed this issue is that, you know, now it's so simple to get your hands on a weapon that's how, you know, these issues are being solved. You know, the shootouts between teenagers is how these, you know, toddlers were killed in Cleveland recently. And, you know, in the, you know, I suppose the you know, West Side Story days, it was a switchblade, right?
Yeah.
So
Razor
there is
blades.
something else. There's an external, there are externals that are affecting this as well. And if it's so easy to get weapons that not only can you get them for protection, but you get them to raise money, which is one of my takeaways from the Caniglia story, that suggests again that a pressure point here, not the only one. Certainly you have to keep pushing on all these other things. I think the Cleveland schools are still struggling with the financial issues of how to provide alternative safe spaces for kids after school hours. But nonetheless, you know, this is one pressure point, and I think we can't not talk about some of the issues of how to make guns less readily available to criminals.
Right. I think that's half the equation, and the other half, you know, Khalid Samad had pointed out, you know, is the lack of conscience. Where in the case of Ramon, the 5-year-old who was shot, I mean, that these two teens would shoot at each other through a crowd of people, that there was no conscience about hitting innocent bystanders, that they didn't wait to take care of their business like in West Side Story on a rooftop. You know, they did it in
to the
public.
head. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You know, they did it in public. And the same thing and the same thing with Major Howard. You know, where you're just randomly shooting into a car.
Right, but isn't this also a function? These are young people who, you know, it's not that they lack conscience, maybe it's simply that they lack, you know, judgment, and they lack perspective because, you know,
Well,
they're
I think all
in
three.
a place. Yeah.
I mean, I think.
But I hear this conversation creeping toward what's supposed to be a legal solution, and I don't think there is one.
I agree.
I don't.
No.
If you're going to try to limit the availability of guns, the people who are going to be limited are the ones who follow the law, and they will follow the law. When you pass the law that says X, Y, and Z have to be done before you can get a gun, that's what they'll do because that's what we see today. And the people who don't follow the law and who see the law as actually an impediment to what they try to do in their day-to-day life are not going to go there. They're going to find a way. They're going to find new ways to get guns.
Right, but we've talked about this,
they
Kevin.
will.
I mean, there's ways where you can involve the gun manufacturers so that you can have, you know, codes or locks on the gun so that when you buy a gun legally, you're the only person who can use it. If it fell into my hands, I wouldn't have the code or the DNA fingerprint or whatever that would activate that gun.
I also think that, you know, society has to reach a compromise on this. You know, I have long lived in a household where there were many weapons, and there was a concern if you have to register your weapon, then you know the big brother is going to come and collect them at some point, right? So I know that concern is out there, but at the same time, when guns are proliferating in the hands of criminals, and police are frustrated that they don't have the tools that they need to do the gun traces that they need to do, or to keep you know, that pipeline to shut it down at some point, because some of it is being fed by people who can buy guns through loophole means, and therefore there's no background check, or they're buying for felons, et cetera. I do think you have to reach a compromise. I mean, I think it really, frustrated people, and certainly the parents of those who've been killed by guns, that even after all those children were killed at Sandy Hook, that there was simply not even one single substantive change made in the law.
But that was not a gang situation.
No, but
I mean, I think I mean, I agree that there should be greater gun control. Exactly what shape it should take, I'm not exactly sure. But I think that would only help things on the margins, because it's not necessarily. I mean, the guns will always be there. But it's getting maybe more community policing out there. It's getting into these neighborhoods where the gangs operate, and getting to the kids who, when they're at the age where they could go in a good direction or a bad direction. That's where you make a real difference. You know, you'll never get all the guns off the street. You know, you may have on the margins. You may make things better in that regard. But that's treating the symptom, and what you really need to do is treat the cause.
There's a world of difference between passing a law and getting compliance, just as there is a world of difference between word and example. And people who are coming up in the culture that we're talking about get all kinds of words. And we talked about the schools, we talked about the Peace in the Hood guys, we talked about rec centers, all those things that we try to put in their way to move them onto a path that we think's better for them and for us. And yet, the example that's all around them says that's not the way to go. The way to go is to get with a gang because you don't want to be a straggler in this society, because
Well, but
you're
also
easily
for-
picked off at that point.
But you
You're
also
a
get
victim
jumped.
then.
Could be protection.
You know, it's
yeah.
protection. A lot of
That's
it's
what I'm
protection,
saying. You
yeah.
don't want to be a straggler. You want to be in with the group so
Right.
that you have some safety in numbers.
Exactly.
And you're not going to get guns out of the hands of gangs, because gangs see them as an absolute necessity for their own survival. And it doesn't matter what laws you pass.
I agree.
They'll find ways, or if you close a loophole, they're going to find a different way to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but
and
I think that goes back to what Pete was saying, though, about making those communities safer, so that way people don't feel as though they have.
I mean, do
to go
kids
to
really
gangs
get
or
jumped? I mean,
terrorists.
if a kid wants
Yes.
to, if
Yeah,
a kid
you
wants
can.
to walk to the rec center on a Saturday morning and play some basketball or ping pong or whatever, are there going to be kids
Depending
along
on the
the way
neighborhood,
who
yes.
who are saying, you know,
Right. Sharon has a
You
story.
could. Yeah,
Sharon-
my daughter has seen at least 2 kids, like one downtown and the other one was near Shaker with 6 kids, you know, beating up on one kid. I don't know what the case
there
was.
there was one story you were talking about where the teen went to visit his grandmother who lived
Yes.
in the city,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
grandmother told him, "Stay in
Mount
the house.
Pleasant, yeah.
Do not leave the house."
Because he
And
was from Garfield Heights or someplace
Right,
like that.
and he
another-
did. He walked down to the end of the block and went to the convenience store,
Yeah.
and he got jumped.
Yeah, badly, yeah,
So
But he doesn't, you
that's
know-
a real.
right, it's a real fear.
well, there's a lack of leadership then in those neighborhoods and those communities, because that's just
I agree.
Well,
No, the leadership is the criminal
positive,
element.
positive
in charge.
leadership. Positive
This
leadership.
this actually does go
Positive
to,
leadership, lack of
to the
positive
larger
leadership.
issue that is on the table in Cleveland. Cleveland police reform is aimed primarily at reducing the cases of inappropriate use of force, how use of force is documented. But, you know, is this going to, because it's going to be expensive, going to force the Cleveland Police Department to reduce some other things, such as gang unit, their gang unit.
Right, they're going to have to
Yeah,
figure out a
that
way
will-
to fund that. But also, Betsy, I think, you know, it really speaks to the need for community policing, and every community is different, and their needs are different, and I think we have to rethink. You know, it's not one size fits all with community policing, but having officers visible in the neighborhoods,
Out of their cars.
so that when they meet people in the neighborhood, it isn't a confrontation. You know, they're meeting them more on an equal ground. They get to know each other. And I think that can go back to Pete's point, you know, in maybe steering kids in another direction, you know, giving them positive role models. My other solution is to steal from Chris Rock and say we start charging $1,000 for a bullet, because then you really got to want to shoot somebody to.
Well, but again,
Then
Then you want a big buyout, a big
that's
sale
right.
on bullets
Then you
before
just-
the law's passed. They'll start from
Hey, I
all
got a
up.
bullet I'd like to sell you, $990.
All right, $1,000 bullets or some other solution. We'd like to hear from you. We'd like to hear from you on the larger issue of what are some of the ways that the city of Cleveland could address its gang problem and the proliferation of crime guns. And I'm sure we'll be talking about this in the future. Thanks for tuning in.